So what I want to talk about to you today is what some of the things of the revolutionary service automation that we have brought to the market. And I'm not talking about baby step automations. I'm talking about brutal automation that we believe is really required, that once NFV services are in production, they need to be maintained, and we need to automate that process. I've been in too many planes lately, So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the Accanto story, so you know where we're coming from. Then I'm talking about the challenges of productizing these NFV services and what the perfect model would be for that. Then we get to the good stuff, and we'll show you some of the automation that we have brought into the service lifecycle management that we believe will solve that kind of production issues, and I'll show you some examples of that. But let's get started. So a little bit about Accanto itself. So we're a Finnish company. We have an office as well in Reading in the UK. And most of the core team has been working already for quite a while. So the company is quite old in this respect. So back in 2006, part of the team was acquired by Ericsson for our performance management technology. After that, we revamped the company and we started to work in the probing area. The probing technology itself, we then sold to a large company called NetScout. After which we kind of reintroduced Accanto, and we came up with an advanced analytics platform for service quality management. So about 2014, 2015, we started to focus more heavily on the NFV space. And we brought in some of the industry experts, and we figured out that we can really help the operators automate some of these life cycles that we talk about later. So last year at this show, I think it was in The Hague, close to my hometown, we launched together with IBM. So IBM is having our product as part of their portfolio. We launched our product called Stratos Lifecycle Manager. So that has now been deployed commercially. We're in a lot of POCs, we're in a lot of shortlisted. In fact, I've been running in and out of my hotel room to be able to talk to some of the customers and get us to the next level. So this is really kind of really starting as we speak. So if we look at the little bit of the background, so what we see in the whole NFV space and the whole business itself is that there's a transformation from the business side where the operators are being asked to launch much more smaller services, much more quicker than before. It used to be just voice, right? So now all of a sudden you have IoT, you have connected cars, et cetera, and that puts some emphasis or some stress on your network. So second of all, on the technological side, we have a transformation, and that's why we are all in this room, which I think that transformation is happening. We're moving those services from traditional hardware-based to more virtualized services. Now, in this new world, in this new NFV-defined world, all of these services are small software components. And you might have 10, you might have 100, you might have 1,000 or 10,000 of software elements that they all need to be controlled, they all need to be managed, they all need to be orchestrated together. And it's even worse because these software components might be from different vendors, they might sit in different clouds, and they might sit in different locations. So all of these software components, they need to be managed for installation, configuration, but also once they're in production, they need to be able to be scaled, healed, etc. So all of a sudden you get more services, you get more software components that are spread around, so you get a lot of complexity in how to manage that. And on the operational side of things, once you put the NFV services into production, this is where most of the costs, or a lot of the costs of the operator are going into. How do I maintain the service performance? So this is exactly where we are playing, basically. So in order to illustrate that, I'm going to show a couple of examples, and we are introducing here two characters. So we have Jack and Jill, basically. So on the one hand, you have the service engineer, which is Jack. So he's been in telco forever, and for the last 5 years, he's been really working with a lot of NFV services. So the engineers that we meet, so we had a heavy reading webinar a couple of weeks ago, where we had about, I think, 200 operators, or people from operators, and they were all saying that they have worked with virtual CPE, virtual EPC, etc. So these are really the Jacks that have taken on the NFV first. However, there are also very super smart persons in the operations teams. So in this case, that would be Jill. And she doesn't probably, sorry, and she probably doesn't have the skills yet because she hasn't been working with the NFV space very often. But she is being told that within the next 9 to 12 months, we're going to launch some NFV services. So she needs to be able to maintain those services to make sure that they're running correctly. So what would be kind of the ideal operational model in order to deploy these services? So first of all, Jack, the service engineer, he needs to be able to onboard the different VNFs. He needs to stitch those VNFs together and create a service. Quite simple. Once that's done and he's happy, he needs to put those for a couple of verification tests. So he needs to make sure that those VNFs do what they are claiming to do. But maybe more importantly, before it goes to production, he needs to run those through an end-to-end service verification test. So he needs to put, let's say, a virtual EPC, write some traffic generator, write some probes, run that basically to verify that all the components in that virtual EPC are running correctly. And he needs to test if an upgrade or a scale or a heal has an impact on the service performance. And he needs to do this before it goes into production. So he needs to have an environment for that. So once he's happy with the service, he moves it over to Jill. So together they deploy that. So the services needs to be installed, configured, etc. And Jill is now on point. She's responsible to make sure that the service maintains its performance. So on one hand, she's helped in the NFV world by some automated closed-loop healing, so the system is able to scale and heal some of that itself. But sometimes that's not possible. So we need to give Jill the right tools so that she's able to quickly diagnose the problem. She can restore the service into its working state. She is also able to recreate the issue, so she can quickly send the test or ask Jack to test, hey, look at this scenario, run this through your test environment, let's see if we can fix it. And then last, maybe if Jack needs to update the service design, and then this whole process starts again for an upgrade. Yes. So what can we do to automate and to help Jill manage all these complex services that she's going to have to manage in her operations team? And for us, this is, with brutal automation, we mean that these services should be able to be managed just like a satellite navigation system. So when you go to your car, you put in your street address, your destination, and the system takes care of where you are today. It knows that. It knows where you want to go, and it automatically figures out how to get there in the best path. And you don't need any manual programming for that. So Jill is not a programmer. She doesn't need to program her car. I don't think you need to program your car. You need to write the individual steps or the individual street names, etc. You just fill it in, the destination address, and there you go. The system will figure out how to get there best. If something happens, if there's a traffic jam, it will automatically reroute you, again, without manual programming. So this is exactly what we want Jill to be able to do with her NFV services as well. She needs to be able to tell the service, I want a VoIP cluster up and running there. And then the system should be able to automatically say, okay, I can see that you have some parts of that already. It will then determine what's the best path forward and will deploy that execution path in order to deploy that service. And I'm going to show you much more detail about that. So let's imagine a very kind of stupid, simple service. So this service is made up of 3 VNFs, and all these VNFs are stitched together as part of a bigger service. So the VNFs and the service itself all have their own lifecycle. So they need to be onboarded first. They need to be this verification step to check that all the tests are performing correctly, that the VNFs are performing correctly. Then this needs to be deployed. So you need to install it, configure it. And then once it's in production, you have a lot of steps there in order to maintain the service. So you have scale actions, heal actions, and even the more complex upgrade scenarios. So this is just a simple service, but you see that Jill, so the operations person, already has quite a lot of tasks to take care of. And traditionally, and I think this is one of the key, and some of the discussions I've had today as well, traditionally, all of these lifecycle steps are done with manual scripting in, for example, workflow-based models. That should end right here, right? So if you look at what are the steps that you then need to program, so typically, traditionally, you would program the functional tests. So like I said, Jack needs to be able to define, okay, these are the VNFs that I need. I want them deployed in this Vim. I then want to spin up a probe in order to measure the performance. I then want to spin up a traffic generator. And then he still needs to manually program all the test scripts himself. And then he needs to run it. So that's a lot of manual scripting going on. Same thing when you talk about installation, configuration, but especially on the once the service is in production and you are going to scale, heal, and upgrade, those are all manual scripts. So what we believe in Accanto, and this is also where we have our Stratos Lifecycle Manager product, is that most of these things can and should be automated. So we shouldn't be dependent on manually scripting things, because this is a very simple service. If I then apply this to some of the standards that we've been talking about, so I put this in an ATSI Mano context, where you have one VNF controlling, for example, a few VNFs, one VNF manager controlling a few VNFs. You then have an NFVO on top of that, which is maybe orchestrating a service that runs across different VIMs with multiple VNFs, different locations. On top of that, you have a master services orchestrator, which will then be responsible for geo-resiliency. So for example, if you have a VoIP service running across the world, Paris goes down, you then need to make sure that the traffic gets rerouted, you get the double capacity or the scaling going on in London before Paris is turned back on and then move it back. All of that today in workflow is manual scripting. All of that. And if you look at the bottom, it's even worse, because if the service changes, if Jack introduces a new element into the service, these scripts are all related. So you end up really scripting a lot. I was going to say a bad word, but... So in Accanto, again, with the Lifecycle Manager, we are able to automate most of these lifecycle steps. And that's really needed in order to commercially launch NFV services. So what are some of the areas that we can automate? Excuse me. So the service verification piece. So for me, Jack just needs to be able to say, I want a virtual EPC service, go and test it. He doesn't need to be able to program all of those things, like stand up the resources, put the probe there, put the traffic generator there, write the scripts to do the testing, etc. He just needs to say, go and test this. There are some things that you still need to manually program. So every VNF will have to be installed, and they have a different install script. Every VNF has a different configuration script. But for the actions like scale, heal, and upgrade, which is the most complex one, it is very important that we automate that. And I'm going to show you that in a few moments. So I'm going to take a very simple upgrade scenario. And this is, I couldn't do a demo here, but we are showing this live in the other room. So I'm just going to walk you through. So this simple upgrade scenario is we didn't use a single script to upgrade the left side, which is the single VoIP server connected to an external network. And we're going to upgrade that fully to a VoIP cluster. And the VoIP cluster has a proxy, it has a couple of VoIP servers, it has a database, it has a probe. And what is important is that in order, typically you would write a workflow script that says first install the proxy, then install the 3 different VoIP servers, then tell the proxy what is the IP address of these VoIP servers so that it can send traffic to that. What we are doing is we're doing that without any scripting. So how it works is that our intent engine, which is part of the Lifecycle Manager, it knows just like the satellite navigation system, it knows the left side where you are today, so it's gathering that information, for example, from topology. It knows where you're going, so it knows that Jill, in this case, wants to upgrade this single VoIP server into a full-blown cluster. And then it figures out automatically, it breaks down those tasks, it figures out automatically, in order to get there, I need to do all of these different tasks. And I just want to show you how that looks like, for example, and like I said, I couldn't do the live demo here, but so on the left bottom side, it's probably pretty small here on the screen, but you go from the single VoIP server, and you say upgrade, and you define that you want the VoIP cluster, that's it. It basically goes through all these steps automatically. And just to show you how much automation is involved in our Lifecycle Manager action, or Lifecycle Manager, is I can show you the individual steps that the intent engine has gone through. So Jill just said, upgrade this into a VoIP cluster. All of these steps, so if you go from left to right, this is basically the intent engine figuring out the best way forward to go from a single VoIP server into a full-blown VoIP cluster. All of these steps are normally done in workflow manually. We didn't write a single script for this, 0, to do this upgrade scenario. Just going to get back here. Yes, so 2 more slides. So the Accanto Lifecycle Manager, as said, at the heart of the product, there is the intent engine that I just showed you a glimpse of. And the intent engine is able to automate a lot of these service lifecycle management. On the left side, we are also helping Jack. So Jack needs some design tools, so he has a designer to design his services, but he also has this verification tool enable him to automate some of these service verification that we just went through. On the right side, the Lifecycle Manager product has a feature called Service Intelligence. And of course, we're doing all this closed loop assurance. We're also giving some of the tools to Jill to be able to diagnose a problem when it cannot be automatically fixed. And we're going one step further, which is because we are aware of the service, we are also able to collect the KPIs, the KQIs from all these different parts in the service. So we're able to do kind of closed loop service assurance automatically. So we're aggregating these KPI, KQIs into a full-blown service intelligence, self-healing service itself. So just as a small conclusion, I think we can all say that brutal automation is absolutely needed. And especially this automation is needed when we are going to launch all these NFV services. We need to be able, once they are in production, to automate all these different actions, heal, scale, upgrade. It cannot be done manually because we're going to need 80, 100, 200 engineers or operations people to write these scripts. So with the Lifecycle Manager, we are automating these service lifecycle steps. So it means that you don't need to hire a full-blown operations team. And then the ultimate goal is then to get the operational cost down, which is something that we believe that the Lifecycle Manager is really capable to do. And obviously, we want to get Jill on the right side. We want to make her happy. So that's a little bit of the story that I want to share with you today. There's a lot of stuff that we show there, a lot of automation. So you're welcome to come there. And if there's any questions, I happily take them.
We're a little bit tight on time. I would encourage people to just come to the booth and talk to you. It sounds really cool.
Sure, I like to talk, right? So sorry.
So no, you're good. So please thank Victor.
Thank you.